Labą diena, gerbiami Tarptautinio forumo Moteris, taika ir saugumas.
Good morning, dear participants of the International Forum Women, Peace and Security. These three words are taken from the UN Security Council resolution number 1325, which states that inequality between women and men is also an issue when trying to ensure international security and peace. The resolution crowned long efforts by recognizing that war conflicts do not impact women and men equally, and that women need to have equal rights and opportunities to participate in addressing conflicts and ensuring peace. As the former Chilean president, Michelle Bachelet, said, we cannot allow ourselves to deny the potential of half of our population. The world needs to use women's talent and wisdom, be it in the area of food security, economic recovery, health, peace, and security. Women's participation in addressing these issues is important, more important than ever before. The provisions of this resolution are important, are significant today. We are hearing voices that the world is standing at the threshold of a war conflict. The media reports brutal images from different corners of the world every day, and the EU and Lithuania faces the consequences of these conflicts directly. So, do women have enough space at the table when conflicts are addressed, and do they participate in peacekeeping processes? What conflict territories are facing, what women and men working in those territories are facing, and what is the role of civil society in ensuring sustainable peace? So these are only a few questions that we will try to address together with the speakers from 23 countries and various participants. So we are going to have an excellent day with 200 remote participants. Welcome, everyone. I encourage you to participate actively and ask questions. So I'm now very happy to give the floor to a woman, a leader, with whom we have been cooperating for many years. We started with a dance against violence against women in Kudirka Square, and our cooperation continued until this forum. So I will give the floor to the Speaker of the Lithuanian Parliament, Ms. Čmilytė Nielsen. Thank you. Good morning, dear participants. I'm very happy to see some of you face to face. I always also welcome our remote participants. Last year, we marked the 20th anniversary of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. And this resolution means a lot to anyone fighting for equality, because back in 2000, it was recognized that inequality between women and men has another very important dimension, that is ensuring international peace and security. So we've had many efforts trying to show that conflicts impact men and women unequally, and that women should participate in addressing conflicts. Moreover, the participation of women and women being decision makers is key to long-term resolution of conflicts. When we look at the historical perspective and the transformation that took place over the last 100 years, we need to remember that there were many women during World War I who nursed and treated the injured. We also had the suffragette movement, and this pushed women to take on responsibilities and do work which was traditionally regarded as men's work. Thanks to these women, we can vote, we can be elected, we can run for positions, and we can be successful in business leadership and other areas. But despite all the achievements of our civilization, women are those who suffer very serious consequences in war conflicts. And those invisible wars also take place in families, at workplaces, and at schools, including mobbing and other socially unacceptable phenomena that need to be fought against. And this struggle is not simple. It is a paradox, but going back to the resolution of conflicts, we need to admit that women's voice is not heard. This is a man's world. So it is of the utmost importance that we women get involved. We need to use the opportunity to take on leadership in such non-traditional areas for women as international security. We need to use expert insights and the experience of various organizations, and I would like to thank the organizers of this forum. We need to help those women who don't have enough opportunities to be heard in their own countries and who have no place at the decision-making table. Ending conflicts means ending injustice. Well, these words were offered by the activist and Nobel Prize winner, the participant of the Arab Spring in 2010. So we need to think about how we should implement the UN Security Council Resolution 1321, how to make sure that women become fully fledged decision makers and help us to successfully address conflicts. So thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a successful conference. Thank you to the speaker of the Seimas for the introductory remarks, and thank you for your continuous support to women's rights. When we speak about conflicts all around the world, while not being able to address conflicts in our everyday life, when we are unable to see the main reasons behind the gender violence, we need to think about different ways. And I would like to give the floor to the Minister of Social Security and Labor, Ms. Monika Navickienė.
Labadiena.
Good morning, dear Chairwoman, Ambassador, the dear Speaker of the Parliament. I would like to thank you, everyone who is working in this important area of ensuring women's equal opportunities and rights. The 20th anniversary is a nice anniversary to mark, but we have to continue going forward because there are so many challenges remaining in front of us. And speaking about leadership, I should say that I was happy to be born in the family where there was no hesitation or doubt that I am capable of doing something because I am a woman, a daughter. And in the same spirit, we're trying to raise our two daughters with our husband who understand that every objective that you aspire for, every dream can be fulfilled irrespectively of your gender. And when observing my daughters, I can say that in this young generation, there will be less and less stigmatization or discrimination. Today, we have to complete a lot because we can see that not all the women have the courage to speak up and act. They need support. I was inspired by an example of Belarus. Of course, there are not many good examples in this country, but we have seen the women who have had the courage to go out to the streets and with the flowers, without war and without fear, or maybe with fear, but having focused on what they want. They have dared to say no to repressions, to say out loud what they want with holding only flowers in their hands. And that means that we need just a small catalyst to make women become courageous and go out and speak up, and in this way change the world. This is another possibility to draw attention to violence against women, which remains an acute problem not only in Belarus but elsewhere in the world as well. In this government, we have also seen leadership examples. For instance, the Prime Minister, Ms. Shimonite, had the challenge of overcoming the crisis, and we have 6 women in the government, and having come into the government, we have started reviewing and reforming things to manage the crisis. And I am delighted that at this government we have priority actions, that is equal opportunities for women, is one of our priorities, and this has received the largest attention in this government as never before. Therefore, I am delighted that the problematics of equal opportunities is being solved horizontally. This is no longer an issue for one ministry alone, and we are trying to make sure that this policy of equal opportunity is being developed everywhere, and this principle can be a good step forward, not only de jure but also de facto, in order to aspire a better equal opportunities and better protection of women against violence. And we have already drafted a bill in regulating violence against women. I would like to thank NGOs who have helped in drafting this bill, and will also try and help us implement this law when providing help to women suffering from violence. Of course, the government will expect the support from NGOs to empower that. We have to speak up about breaking stereotypes, not only at the political level but elsewhere as well, like schools or families, when helping parents and communities capable of enabling, supporting, and giving courage. And of course, we have to admit that we have not yet completed everything. There's much more room for improvement. Therefore, I'm delighted to see this discussion and international conference happening today. We will hear many inspiring presentations, which will probably help us to not rest inactively on what we have already done, but will contribute to us helping to enable women and to release the potential of women all over the world. Thank you very much.
Noriu padėkoti ir tikėtis, kad kartu.
Thank you very much. And I hope that together with the women in power that we have today, with the Speaker and the Prime Minister and the ministers, we will be able to adopt the law that will protect the victims and finally will help ratify the Istanbul Convention. However, women's protection is not only the matter for women. Therefore, I would like to express my delight with the cooperation with our foreign ministry that helped us organize this event and that has helped us to ensure remote participation in this conference. Therefore, I would like to give the floor to Mantas Adomėnas, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, who will make his presentation today.
Yes.
Dear Speaker of the Parliament, Your Excellencies, dear participants of the forum, I'm very pleased to welcome you at this important forum. I would also like to thank the organizers of the forum, the US Embassy in Vilnius and the Women's Issues Information Center. Last year, when we marked the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, it was obvious that women's involvement in conflict resolution and peacemaking efforts is very important, both on national and international agendas. So this event is another opportunity for us to discuss how we could contribute to a more active participation of women in conflict resolution. We are implementing the resolution, but we have to admit that women's participation in various processes is rather low and insignificant. And it is a paradox that women who are not the initiators of conflicts become the main targets of violence in military situations. And international practice shows that international peace agreements made with the involvement of women are more sustainable. Women's rights and gender equality is a long-term priority of Lithuania. Therefore, we are contributing to the agenda women, peace and security, both at national level and in cooperation with other countries. In the second action plan, we have provided for specific actions and measures in order to reduce the impact of conflicts on on women and girls. And I need to mention that this action plan has been developed with joint efforts of public authorities and non-governmental organizations. Participation of experts looking for innovative ways and experience is very important. And sustainable peace cannot be viewed separately from gender equality. And all this is only possible with full involvement of women. I wish you a constructive discussion, and I believe that this event will become yet another step in the implementation of Resolution number 1325.
Ačiū užsienio reikalų.
Thank you to the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs for his support to women's rights, and I hope that this is only the start of our fruitful cooperation. Well, today, more than ever before, we are feeling the support of the US Embassy to these issues. And now I would like to give the floor to one more very important person. Thanks to his team, we are here today. And the project that brought us together at this international forum is financed by the US Embassy in Lithuania under the Alumni Engagement Innovation Fund 2020 program. The US Ambassador, Mr. Robert Gilchrist, started his work in Lithuania on the 13th of January 2020. Before that, he worked as the director of the Operations Department of the US State Department. He was also the director for Nordic and Baltic countries at the Europe and Eurasia division of the US State Department. He was also deputy advisor, policy advisor at the US Embassy in Iraq, and he also worked in Romania and was a special assistant in the US Secretary of State's office.
Madam Speaker, Madam Minister, and distinguished guests and participants, good morning. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's conference and to see many people in person. It's a delight to be able to interact again and to address such a distinguished group of attendees and participants. The 20th anniversary of the UN Resolution 1325 invites reflection. What have we achieved in our efforts to elevate the role of women in promoting peace and security around the world? And what more do we need to do? We have made progress. Over the past 2 decades, we have expanded women's participation in the institutions responsible for resolving conflict. We have increased protections for women and girls from gender-based violence. We've seen a surge of humanitarian assistance specifically aimed at women and girls. As a diplomat, I have seen these changes firsthand over the course of my career. But 20 years on, we cannot deny that women and girls still suffer disproportionately from violence and armed conflict. It is still far too rare to see women leading or even participating in peace negotiations. Women remain excluded from the halls of power at the local, national, and international levels. The COVID-19 pandemic has further exacerbated these inequities, even reversing some gains we have made. Let me assure you, the United States' commitment to advance women, peace, and security is stronger than ever. On President Biden's first day in office, the United States re-engaged as a member and leader in the World Health Organization. We are revitalizing our partnership with UN Women to help empower women worldwide. In 1944, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt wrote, "Without equality, there can be no democracy." Or, as Vice President Harris rephrased it recently, the status of women is the status of democracy. When women face obstacles to obtaining quality health care, when women face food insecurity, when women are more likely to live in poverty, when women are more vulnerable to gender-based violence and therefore disproportionately impacted by conflict. In these circumstances, it's harder for women to fully participate in decision-making, which in turn makes it that much harder for democracies to thrive. The status of women is the status of democracy. For our part, the United States will work to improve both. While we too still have our own work to do, we are making progress in ensuring that women strengthen our democracy every day. I'm pleased that my colleague, Ambassador Julie Fisher, will be addressing you later today. Furthermore, we are committed to supporting Lithuania as it implements its second National Action Plan. And the U.S. Embassy is very proud to sponsor today's conference as part of the Alumni Engagement Innovation Fund. Rugula Bukajivute, I'm still working on my Lithuanian, I'm sorry, and Dr. Dalia Leonarte, and everyone at the Women's Issues Information Center, we are indebted to you for the tremendous work you have done to promote the security of women. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and for the work that you are doing. Your efforts and your commitment are indispensable to achieving our shared vision of a safer world for all. We are honored to stand with you in that effort. Thank you very much.
Ačiū ambasadoriau dar kartą jums ir jūs.
Thank you, Ambassador, and your whole team for the contribution to the success of this event. I would also like to express my delight that not all the EU institutions are located in Brussels. We have one located in Lithuania, responsible for equal opportunities. It is our long-term partner. And I would like to give the floor to Marusha Gortnar, the representative of EIGE.
Laba diena. Good morning, distinguished speakers and participants. I'm honored to be with you today to mark the 20th anniversary of the UN Resolution on Women, Peace and Security, Resolution 1325. At the European Institute for Gender Equality, we believe that data tells stories. And when it comes to women in peace and security, the story is one that is evolving. First, let us be completely honest. When we look at the data on women's representation in peace and security today, the figures are pitiful. Across the 27 countries of the European Union, women make up a tiny proportion of defense and foreign affairs ministers. Since Lithuania's second independence in 1991, there has been one female defense minister and not a single female foreign affairs minister. I don't mention these figures to make Lithuania look bad, no, by no means. These are the figures that are not at all different to the figures we see in most other countries of the European Union. In my home country, Slovenia, for example, we have had two defense ministers that were women, and precisely 0 women have held the post of foreign affairs minister. The situation in Germany is the same. This lack of women heading foreign policy and defense issues in the EU member states is then reflected in the EU top decision-making bodies, with the EU Foreign Affairs Council mainly made up of men. This means that decisions that have a global impact on women as well as men are made almost exclusively by men. International trade agreements may miss how women's role in the labor market differs from that of men. Support to people displaced by war may miss the best ways to help women and girls of sexual violence and trafficking. So why is this? A lack of interest is clearly not the problem. If we look at EU countries' diplomatic corps, there's often a very different picture compared to what we see at the top table. In Lithuania, for example, more than half of diplomats are women. We don't have data for all EU countries, but we can also find high shares of women in Estonia, Denmark, Latvia, Finland, Slovenia, and of course, Sweden. Clearly, there is still resistance to women making the ultimate decision when it comes to the peace and security of our countries. Yet, this is where the story is evolving. Representation of women in the field of peace and security has been creeping up. In the EU diplomatic service, for example, some 35% of people are now women, up from 30% only 5 years previously. This is the result of formalized commitments to raise the number of women in the service, which is an approach that has also been successful in the EU member states. Of course, you cannot just add women and stir and hope that a field dominated by men for centuries will instantly be transformed. There is a more profound shift going on when it comes to our understanding of what peace and security entail. You can see this in Sweden's pioneering feminist foreign policy, which is something that has been emulated by countries such as France and Luxembourg. This approach makes sure that women's particular needs are taken into consideration throughout foreign policy action, as well as, of course, setting ambitious targets for women's representation. While the EU has not yet adopted such a policy, the European Parliament has called for it. The EU Diplomatic Service also recently adopted its third action plan on gender and is in the process of filling a high-profile role for a gender advisor. So while women have always faced the consequences of foreign policy decisions, their story in shaping the peace and security agenda is still a young one. And while the situation requires a lot more work, we can already see the winds of change. And thank you very much for hosting this conference to help us get closer to our goal, which is gender equality in the European Union and beyond. Thank you very much.
Dar kartą dėkoju visiems už.
Thank you very much for allocating your time and attention and working in a clear direction to ensure women's rights in democratic processes and in maintaining peace. Thank you, Rugilė Butkevičiūtė, Dalia Leinartė, alumni scholarship winners who are the creators of the concept of this event, the US Embassy, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and of course the Women's Information Center team for your huge efforts when organizing this international forum. I would like to see us gathering at 2023 at the NATO Assembly in even larger women's forum meant for women's peace and security issues for Vilnius. And I would like to invite you for
Daugiau negu metus nešiojasi renginio koncepciją galvoje.
I have been carrying this events concept in my mind, and I see it happening. I'm so delighted to see so many women speaking up for women's rights and for involving the women in these issues. And now I would like to give the floor to Tatiana Skulitskaya, who is a senior researcher at Vytautas Magnus University. She participated at a few international research projects, including EU STRAT project focused on Eastern Partnership Program analysis and Project Contact, focused on hate speech and hate crime. Her research interests are public policy analysis, civil society in non-democratic regimes, reforms in the post-Soviet states, Belarusian studies, welfare state and social policy of the post-Soviet states. She has a number of academic and research publications. From 2011, Tatiana also has been cooperating with the Belarusian Formal Education Project and a think tank, Simpa Bipart, in Belarus, within which she is in the position of an academic director. Tatiana, the floor is yours, and we are eager to hear your presentation.
Laba diena, good afternoon, добрый день. I'll add one more language to our conference. I'm really feel privileged and honored to be here with you today and to raise my female voice of a native-born Belarusian on such a high-profile event. Today, I will address several issues in my speech. The first one is the security issues on the
Ačiū Jums, ačiū už kalbą.
Завершил? Great. So I'll speak about several issues. The first one is about security challenges in the Eastern Partnership countries. Then I'll reflect a bit on civil society role in changes in post-Soviet countries. And then I'll give my story about Belarus and also my personal stories and stories of my colleagues in Belarus today. So when we are speaking about security challenges in the Eastern Partnership countries, we mainly address them from the real politics perspective viewpoint of the challenges to sovereignty and territorial integrity of the new independent state of the former Soviet Union, namely those posed by armed conflicts. However, I would like to emphasize that it's more important to use a broader concept of security when in addition to the hard security aspects, we incorporate various aspects of soft security, including economic, environmental, and humanitarian aspects. At the same time, we should bear in mind that in the contemporary world, the boundary between hard and soft security, they are indeed blurry. From the very formation, the Eastern Partnership countries potentially sidestepped one of the region's main problems, the profound security challenges stemming from several sources. The first one is called protected conflicts or frozen conflicts. So we know that 5 out of the 6 Eastern Partnership countries are grappling with unresolved territorial disputes on non-recognized entities on their territories in which Russian troops are directly or indirectly involved. Russia holds the key role to the resolution of these conflicts and actively leverages them as a deterrent to geopolitically risk-averse EU member states and to distract association countries' governments from much needed reforms. Sometimes it uses them to outright pressure points as it did towards Armenia. The second point of conflicts is so-called hybrid threats. We know that hybrid threats is a kind of a catchphrase which actually includes a lot of concepts and notions, everything from dissemination of campaigns to cyber attacks and from hostile intelligence operations to covert military actions. We know that today, as I repeat myself, 5 out of 6 countries are to some extent engaged in conflicts, and I will reflect later on Belarus. There is no an open conflict. However, I would consider Belarus as having a civil war today. And the third source of insecurity, weakness in the national security sectors. Basically, we saw that in the last decade, the European Union has ramped up its assistance to security sector reform in Eastern Partnership countries, but has primarily focused on the soft security issues, most notably the prosecutors, the judiciary, and the police. The Eastern Partnership countries, and in particular the 3 association countries, seek assistance elsewhere, given the paramount importance they attach to the national security and building the capacity of their military and security services toward of external threats. Here, I was supposing to tell you more about security challenges, about what civil society do in these security challenges. However, for the sake of time, I will rather reflect here on the role of civil society in the post-Soviet countries and the Eastern Partnership countries. So basically, from the all theoretical and practical knowledge, we know that civil society and civil society organizations are tremendously important and play a prominent role in the evolution of state and society. So basically, the relationships between their social political orders and organizations are not so easy, and I would say that they are quite ambivalent. So basically, most limited access orders, they restrict the very possibility of forming organizations and associations independent from the state. Democratization theorists see the development of civil society as an important aspect of the democratization processes, or what we call here a process of opening, ensuring broad access to institutions and organization. In transition to democracy, civil society is often instrumental in starting the transition, but continues to be important later in creating new political actors, monitoring governance and state institutions, and resisting reversals. We see exactly this role which women, female organizations, and other civil society organizations perform in Eastern Partnership countries and in other countries of the former Soviet Union. However, we also know that there are some quite other organizations which exist in post-Soviet countries and which exist in non-democratic regimes. Paradoxically, they are called governmental, non-governmental organizations. So it's a kind of oxymoron, and I will explain what it means. So basically, these organizations, they are sponsored by the states, and they are supported by the state budget, and they operate in domains which are totally related to the legitimacy of non-democratic regime, in supporting non-democratic elections, and also promoting different non-democratic projects. Here you see an example of one of the Belarusian governmental non-governmental organizations. Paradoxically, once again, it is called the Belarusian Women Union. So basically, they pretend that they unite all the women of Belarus, and indeed they have quite big numbers of members. You also see from the photos a kind of a social and also visual portraits of such females. I do not like make such assumptions usually. However, here we see definitely that these are the women who are involved in power, who exercise some state authorities, and who are basically pretending to be a part of civil society. At the same time, they actually provide repression, suppression of female voice and of civil society organization inside the country. So basically, the main role of these organizations is cooperation with the state and provision of preserving the states and authorities in the country. And now I will tell you a bit more about situation in Belarus and so-called female revolution in Belarus. As all of you have heard about Belarus during the last summer and during the last months after the forced hijacking of the airplane, where Lithuanian citizens were on the board as well. So what we got in Belarus, actually, we got a huge huge civil society and political mobilization, unlike whatever we had previously in the political history of this country. Reasons of civic mobilization and protest activities in Belarus were quite diverse. I just will mention several of them. So basically, elections 2020 demonstrated essential changes in Belarus and Belarusian public sphere and in Belarusian society in general. The first change was a breakdown of the previously existed in the country social contract. The main elements of this social contracts was a deliberate refusal of Belarusians to take part in any political activities for the sake of relatively stable personal well-being and level of social welfare provision. A big paternalistic state with a strong leader ruled the country. Developments after election clearly demonstrate that Belarusians do not follow the condition of these contracts anymore and actively practice their political and civil rights. The second reason, in my opinion, in this like female revolution and changes in which are going on in Belarus are caused by an external factor of COVID-19 epidemic, which, while being global and inevitable per se, got an inadequate political answer from Belarusian authorities. So for a long period, President Lukashenko, he was just refusing that the very virus exists in nature. He was refusing any quarantine measures. He was refusing everything. And here I would stress that women were the most suffered group because the majority of women in Belarusian hospitals are women. So they didn't have any protective measures. They didn't have any protective costumes and anything, but the state was just refusing that the epidemic exists in principle. All this, the situation with COVID and like this inadequate reaction of Belarusian authorities, it raised a huge reaction of civil society. So basically, Belarusian society and civil society itself, they helped Belarus and helped Belarusian citizens to cope with this epidemic and with the epidemiological crisis. However, that was the second reason why people in Belarus they stopped to trust the government at all. The next reason is that Belarusian authorities, for some reasons, either unintentionally missed or intentionally didn't pay sufficient attention to the changes within society. So Lukashenko basically tried to conduct business as usual, not to pay attention to youth, to female, to any other protest group, and to any other civil society groups. And here we saw the appearance of female leadership in Belarus, which was also quite unusual. Basically, unexpectedly appeared in the campaign. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya claimed herself at the beginning as a very technical candidate. So she was saying that she just came to politics to free her husband, who was detained, who was arrested at the very beginning of the presidential campaign. And she also promised that she would provide grounds for the future free and fair elections. The main and practically the only statements about geopolitics in her campaign was about the preservation of existing international obligations of the country, including participation in all the organizations and so on. However, after the elections and first departure from the country, Tikhanovskaya became active on the international arena, probably even more active than in the domestic issues. Her main dimensions of activities is in the West. Also, it is more forced rather than volunteer choice. While Tikhanovskaya and her team promotes the idea of a foreign policy balance between East and West. However, in spite of all public and non-public attempts, Tikhanovskaya is accepted by international leaderships. We see here her meeting with President Macron, and basically during the last more than half a year, she met with a lot of political leaders of the world. And here, like in addition to this female leadership, we also got female protests in Belarus, and it was actually tragical development, as my colleagues mentioned before, because you see on the pictures that after the elections, just after the elections, a lot of people were heavily beaten in Belarus. You see these pictures, and trust me, these are not the worst pictures we have, unfortunately. But what the women did, they actually demonstrated an unprecedented level of solidarity in a situation where violence reigned for 3 days immediately after the elections in the country. So thousands of people were detained and beaten, and several people were killed. It was then that women in white took the streets for the first time and lined the streets in chains of solidarity with flowers. Later, the chains grew in large-scale marches on Saturday, and here you also see the pictures, and which lasted for several months until the repressions became too hard. Women activists in Belarus actualized the rhetoric of non-discrimination and opposition to patriarchy during the protest marches. They demonstrated how their bodies could be used to expand the space of freedom. Women became both the engine and the most vulnerable link in the protests of Belarus. On the one hand, they initiated and became the heroes of the protests. On the other hand, they became the target of special repressions by the non-democratic authorities. When they were threatened that their children would be taken away, their parental rights would be revoked, and other similar threats were made and are made up till now. And here I will share a very personal stories and make a very personal intervention to demonstrate female role and female voices in the tragic developments in Belarusian situation. I'll show you just 3, not the highest profile cases. However, in my opinion, they illustrate quite well what is going on in Belarus. I will show you my personal friends and those who suffered from the regime. The first one is Valeria Volcagonova. She is a young female leader. She is a member of non-governmental organization in Belarus, which is promoting gender equality, human rights, civic participation, and other pro-democratic values. She was detained in October. She spent just 14 days in prison. And saying just 14 days in prison, I feel myself really terrible because just 14, like 2 weeks in prison for nothing. Now she's a student, like she's studying online at Vytautas Magnus University here in Lithuania. However, I know from her personal stories that she's suffering. She's still suffering from the psychological attacks, like fear attacks, and she's still feel herself very damaged. The second story is more high profile story. This is Yulia Slutskaya. She is a Belarusian journalist. She is the head of one of the well-known Belarusian civil society organization, which is called Belarusian Press Club. And she was arrested just before the Christmas on the 22nd of December. She was coming back to Belarus with her grandchildren, with her daughter. And she was detained in the airport. Up till now, we do not know what she is accused in. So, like, no reasons. She's just imprisoned. And the last story, this is very my personal story. This is my colleague, Tatiana Kuzina. She was detained just, she was detained just on Monday. We still don't know what for. And right now I see the message that she will be stayed in prison for more days, months, and no explanations what happened there. So we don't know the reasons, and the lawyer could not tell either us, her colleagues, or her husband what is going on there. These are not high-profile people. I mean, like maybe Yulia Slutskaya is a bit more high-profile, but others are not. But I think that Belarus is not in a formal war. However, it's indeed a civil war. It's war against civil society and against society. So here I believe like the convention we are discussing today and we are honored to discuss and celebrate here should be implemented in order to protect all female and all like people of goodwill in Belarus. So thank you so much and sorry for my emotions.
Ačiū labai, Tatiana.
Thank you, Tatiana, for a very personal presentation, and thank you for showing us the faces of those women who are the real faces of peace. Before introducing to you the first panel discussion of today's, I would like to address you, not only those in this hall, but also those who are following us virtually. Make use of this opportunity to ask questions, send us your contacts, and tell us what you are most interested in. In any event, contacts are the most important issue, and only together we may join hands and make the world a little bit smaller. Now I would like to introduce to you Professor Dalia Leinarte, who will be moderating this session, an excellent colleague with whom we were creating the contents of this project. Dalia is the CIDO committee member, and also the previous chair, and she participated when the CIDO committee was drafting the general recommendation number 38, trafficking in women and girls in the context of global migration. Apolitical chose Dalia Leinarte in the list of the 100 most influential actors of the world's gender equality policy, and she is the editor of the author of books Adopting and Remembering Soviet Reality, Life Stories of Lithuanian Women, 1945-1970, and the Lithuanian Family in a European Context, and a Family and the State in Soviet Lithuania. Dalia, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Rugilia, for a very warm and welcome introduction. I was extremely honored, and I was surprised with our cooperation when preparing this forum. Now I would like to welcome all participants of this forum and all the co-locutors, and I am extremely honored to be the moderator of our first session. I would like to start the session with a few figures, and I would like to remind all of us that globally, women approximately account for 10% of those sitting at the negotiations table. However, after long negotiations, when peace agreements are signed, only 3% of women sign them. Therefore, it's not accidental that the first session is called "Is There Enough Place at the Table?" And it is meant for women's political representations and its importance. Our speakers are exceptional women. They are long-term politicians, diplomats, and experts who are most experienced, and these women determine national, regional, and international politics. The first speaker is Ms. Rasa Juknevičienė, we know her in Lithuania very well. She has been member of the European Parliament since 2019, and she is vice chair of Subcommittee on Security and Defense delegation of the EU, and she is a member of the European Parliament Committee dealing with the issues of interfering with internal issues, and INJE Special Committee on Foreign Interference in all democratic processes in the European Union, including disinformation, then member of the DACP delegation to the ACP EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly, and also NAT delegation for relations with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Ms. Rasa Juknevičienė, the floor is yours, please. Thank you very much. I am delighted to see my colleagues and people from Lithuania. I am now speaking from my office at the European Parliament. Unfortunately, I could not participate directly because I'm coming back to Lithuania only tomorrow. I am delighted to have been invited to speak here. I had the opportunity to participate directly in the adoption of the resolution that we are now speaking about. I was the Minister of Defense at that moment. When I became minister, it was nothing special for me, but some part of our society found it strange, especially nowadays when I participate in the meetings discussing the issues with our eastern neighbors. They find it something extraordinary, and I am really looking forward to the period of time when such things are no longer held extraordinary. My colleague Juozas Olekas is a medical practitioner, and he had the military degree, which was compulsory to all medical practitioners during the Soviet period. But nobody was surprised to see him as a minister, while they were surprised to see me as a minister. But our army did not find it extraordinary, and the larger part of our society either. I believe that when we continue discussing that later, we will dwell upon those topics. The largest impression that I received at that period, and now while listening to these presentations, well, the largest impressions were left with visits uh, to Afghanistan. And then I realized how good it was to have been born in Europe and even Lithuania, when many people say that we have huge problems in Lithuania. Everyone has problems, of course, but the topic of this discussion is there's whether is a seat at the table enough. And uh, when we were discussing the Iran issues, uh, it was the first time in history that Iran allowed a woman to come to the office and sit at the sofa at the farthest corner of the room so that they could see a live woman being a defense minister. And these women approached me very timidly to touch a live woman being defense minister. And this problem remains acute these days when we are speaking about conflict solving. I said a speech at the plenary session. Afghanistan remains an important issue. And when I saw with girls wearing white scarves and going to school honestly, which they could not do before that, I actually raised an issue whether after our soldiers and the US soldiers are taken away from Afghanistan, removed from Afghanistan, whether they will have the right to go to school, and to what extent is the civilization of this country developed. I have huge hopes because through participation of women, the mentality of the country may change. But on the other hand, this is a huge concern whether their lives will not be taken away. And their fate should be also a concern for us. I have to respond to the questions which I received when preparing for this conference, what is happening near us. And the Belarusian representatives spoke about that. And our panel discussion received the question whether we do not raise the issues of women in the context of the Belarusian revolution, and these issues, women's issues, were not being solved in the Maidan revolution either. My response is very simple. The Belarusians are very smart when raising one single question in their fight, the free elections, because it's only through free elections and democracy that all other issues may be solved, and no matter whether they are human rights or death issues or women's issues or other issues, the most important ones which reached us in the same way. The Belarusian women enchanted all of Europe, and we participated in preparing those resolutions. Women's activity, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and other colleagues' participation in this fight have made a huge impression, and this is without declaring on paper the women's rights, but it's just an appeal towards active, peaceful women able to peacefully participate in solving conflicts and fighting for a civilized state. And in the European continent, it should be a common sense issue. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Rasa, for your introductory remarks. And it was quite spontaneous because our format had to concentrate on our introductory remarks, and then I would have asked various questions. That is, all democratic processes that should involve women's rights issues. But it's excellent that you have formulated another important direction, and I will ask other speakers to react to that when we start our discussion, because our forum participants will be able to join. The question is huge and really harsh, whether women's rights should be solved now and here at every stage of building peace, or whether this should be delayed. This is both provoking and constructive in the context of the resolution 1325. Now I'll give the floor to our next speaker, Rasa Ostrowskaite, who is now the ambassador under ESBO, and previously Rasa Ostrowskaite participated, led the mission in Iraq dealing with people who have disappeared, and she also managed the ESBO International Threats Department and was the deputy of the ESBO department head. And she has written 2 books and 2 academic articles on EU foreign policy. The floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to participate in this conference, and I'm very proud to be speaking right after Madam Rasa Yuknevichene. I'm very proud of her because she's an example of women's leadership. She always raises women's issues, and As was mentioned in the introductory remarks, we did not have many female defense ministers, and we are very happy that she was successful in that position and show that women are able to do any jobs. And now I would like to spontaneously respond to what Rasa has said. Well, when we speak about women's rights, I believe that we need to raise women's issues 110%, and we need to think about general issues and about how we should position the freedom of political determination of a nation. And I believe that we need to focus on free elections now and try to resolve all the other issues in that context. I would like to give my speech in English because I usually give my speeches in English, and I would not like to make any terminological mistakes. So I'll now switch to English.
Enough. It is a great opening question which allows us to address several aspects. First, if we don't get a seat at the table, how do we get one? And shall we be bold enough to bring our own folding chairs? And second, having a seat at the table does not automatically mean inclusion. And having a seat at the table should not be confused with having a voice and being included in the discussion. And as a special advisor to the United Nations Secretary General once said, while women's inclusion in gender and gender equality may not be guaranteed against conflict, the absence virtually ensures it. And simply put, if you ignore the views and perspectives of over half of the world's population, you cannot have equality or lasting peace. Or as President of the European Council, Charles Michel, said last night at the Gender Equality Forum in Paris, you simply cannot ignore the talent of half of the population. But if the case for women's inclusion at the seat at the table is so obvious, how come we're still struggling and we're still discussing more than 20 years after the adoption of the groundbreaking Security Council Resolution 1325? How come we still need to make the case for having a seat at the table? Now, gender equality is a top priority for the European Union, and including promoting women's participation in political and public life, which we see as a crucial issue in achieving gender equality. All OSCE participating states have committed to advancing women's participation in political and public life. Gender equality and women's representation are not only about human rights, they also work as effective means for change. Evidence shows that equality and women's rights are fundamental to the success of any society. Equal and meaningful participation of women in political and public life is necessary for the effective functioning of a democratic society. It is also a matter of justice, respect for fundamental rights, and good governance. It is needed to better reflect the composition of a society and to strengthen democracy. It also brings benefits to the economic growth and competitiveness. It is also an instrument to conflict resolution and peace building because it enables more legitimate and more sustainable peace processes. Accordingly, the matter is directly linked to the comprehensive concept of security. And yet at the same time, much remains to be done to ensure the equal participation of women in democratic processes within the OSCE area. While there has been progress in political participation in national parliaments, this progress is rather slow and uneven. There are several ways of increasing women's participation in political life. Different countries have adopted different strategies. Some focus on quota. Others introduce alteration between female and male candidates on the electoral lists. Still others focus on awareness raising. There are multiple ways of increasing women's participation in public life, and we can all learn from each other's best practices and experience. OSCE's commitments call on participating states to consider legislative measures to facilitate a more balanced participation of women and men in political and public life, especially in decision-making. We should lead by example. OSCE participating states have a fundamental role to play in ensuring high-caliber female candidates for various OSCE positions. But the statistics for both seconded and contracted positions show that more action is needed, especially in the field missions, where women's representation at the moment stands only at 24%. Leading from the top is a prerequisite to progress. Now, in order to promote women's participation in political and public life, we also need to create inclusive socioeconomic policies, offer free education for all, comprehensive health systems, daycare for children, especially for under school age, as well as maternity and parental leave systems. Combating gender stereotypes, negative attitudes, and behavior also needs to be addressed. Women should be permitted equal access to the traditional male-dominated public space. The global Me Too movement has drastically changed the way relations and inappropriate behavior are dealt with. The role and engagement of men and boys is also necessary in promoting the participation of women in political and public life. And we continue to underline the importance of using men-engaged networks as a vehicle to ensure that men actively promote gender equality. Now, let me move to the role of political parties, which I see as gatekeepers and especially crucial in facilitating the entry of women into politics. Political parties are key players in terms of women's access to elected office and leadership positions. In line with the Beijing Platform for Action, political parties need to identify barriers to gender equality within their own internal structures and programs and act to eliminate these barriers. Women must be encouraged to engage in political processes. Political parties must be encouraged to reach out to women, and institutions must make sure that women and men get equal access. Concrete ideas such as developing gender action plans for political parties and establishing caucuses that bring together women party members are also a good idea. Women's parliamentary caucuses act both as useful supporters to women parliamentarians, but also as mechanisms to influence and shape policy. Cross-sectoral cooperation amongst all actors in the society, including civil society actors, is also critical to promoting gender equality. The role of civil society and women's organizations who undertake important work in promoting gender equality is very important. In this context, we regularly call for more regular engagement with a wide range of civil society actors on this issue. Women's participation in public life goes beyond political participation. Public institutions and non-participating states should also engage actively in striving for more gender equality and gender parity in their own organizations, especially when it comes to management positions within the civil service and specific categories of public administration, such as the judiciary, diplomacy, police, armed forces. Let me also state the obvious. Women is a very heterogeneous group. Therefore, particular attention needs to be paid to women and girls that belong to vulnerable groups. This includes Roma, which also includes women and girls belonging to national minorities, women and girls with disabilities, LGBTI, displaced women, women pertaining to socioeconomic disadvantaged groups, all of them often facing multiple forms of discrimination. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has hit women and persons belonging to oppressed and marginalized groups in society disproportionately hard. It has exacerbated existing inequalities. This has strengthened the need for an intersectional approach to combating gender inequality at large, as well as specific difficulties like violence against women and girls, discrimination, or the protection of women in a conflict cycle. Intersectionality as an analytical tool and a method of praxis challenges the idea of women existing as a homogeneous social group. And as a method, it also takes into account that women encounter inequality in very different ways. This term has also been used to understand women's experiences at the intersection of a number of simultaneous oppressions, including but not limited to sex, ethnicity, social origin, political or any other opinion. Intersectional approaches to combating gender inequalities also recognize that all oppressions exist simultaneously. Online interaction has become an integral part of our society and public life. Protection of women online deserves our attention too, especially women in public professions, including but not only journalists, are at risk of being double victims of online harassment, once because of their job and once because they are women. And fighting online harassment must also be an integral part of any strategy preventing and combating violence against women. Now, let me turn slightly to the European Union. There has been some progress, and the proportion of women members in the single or lower houses of national parliaments in the European Union has increased to 32%. In 2020, the women accounted for about 22% of parliamentary leaders, 21% of leaders of major political parties, and 31% of government ministers. However, the rate of progress is uneven amongst the EU member states. There is also evidence that women reaching cabinet level positions usually are allocated portfolios considered to have lower political priority, such as sociocultural or economic functions. And a more gender-neutral allocation of portfolios could show that governments commit more strongly to gender equality. Data from 2019 show that women accounted to 32 members of local assemblies from the European Union. So to conclude, better gender balance in local politics is also very important. And in other words, and again, slightly on a lighter note, we will probably need still to rely on some folding chairs before we can answer the question of, is the seat at the table enough? Because there are simply not enough seats for us yet. And with that, I shall conclude.
Gerbiama Rasa, didelis dėkui.
Thank you, Rasa. Without further ado, I would like to invite my compatriot, Seimas member Dovilė Šakalienė, who is also the promoter of fundamental rights and who has been working at the National Security and Defense Committee as well as the Ethics and Procedures Committee. And she is a co-founder of the Parliamentary Women's Group and participates in the Developmental Cooperation, Reproductive and Sexual Health and Rights Group. Also, she is the co-founder and co-chair of IPAC, and she was active in raising questions on gross human rights abuses in China. She was recently listed by China's People's Republic alongside with other EU politicians and academia, and she is also the political godmother of Maria Kolesnikova, imprisoned leader of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's presidential campaign, and also of MP4 Freedom Initiative. I would like to invite Dovilė to speak without responding to the main question of our discussion. Thank you, Dalia. Thank you, colleagues. I am delighted to see you all, and unfortunately, we cannot meet all forum participants live. I hope that we will manage the pandemic sooner or later. Especially, I am delighted with the topic whether a seat at the table is enough. Sometimes we think that it's enough. But as Dalia has mentioned, when we need to put signatures and adopt decisions, we are told to sit silently with our phones off. We would like not only to have a seat at the table, but also to have equal opportunities everywhere. And what should I emphasize when speaking to you? Ms. Yuknevichene and Astruskaite gave us many important data, and of course, Dalia, when starting this discussion, said that I will probably share a personal story, and as my colleague has said, we probably do not always evaluate what we have completed, and we have to be proud of the fact that we have overcome a lot. And sometimes just sharing a story helps. When you make many mistakes and you fall and get up again, I would like to refer to the book Lean In, which actually raises the question, what would you do if you did not fear? I would actually stop questioning whether I am worth to be where I am, whether I am not more stupid and less competent than those others at the table. When I participated in a conference with Justin Trudeau, he said something very important. When I speak to men or regarding important posts at the government, I say, where were you? Because I'm ready. And when I ask a woman to take a position at the government, the woman questions whether she will manage. And when colleague Rasa Yuknevichene left, she was the only NFKK woman at the committee, and the National Security and Defense Committee. And well, how is it related to national security if I am only the human rights expert? But both things belong together. If we are not able to ensure democracy, how can we ensure human rights? And the human rights are the basis of democracy in national security issues, because this helps us to withstand the dictatorships. I am delighted to have been able to establish the Violence Prevention Commission, and I asked for a mandate to this commission. I was competent enough to write the political program, but after the elections, I heard, why do you need to occupy a position? Because a woman should silently do her work without demonstrating herself. And well, actually, our democratic society has sorted people so many times based on gender, based on disabilities, and I have been asked so many times, why should I go to politics? Because you have an oncological disease. Why should I go to politics? You are a woman. Do you have any needs of self-realization? Do you think you could be useful in decision-making bodies which determine certain national issues? And it was very difficult for me to start speaking about that. But of course, I heard many times that abnormal people are there in the parliament. But I have also heard from others that people want to see the next generation being able to participate in the same as depending on their competence and knowledge and capabilities. I thank Mantas Adomenas for inviting me to join the founders when establishing the Interparliamentary Alliance regarding China. During those 2 years, we have completed the processes that had stuck for a few decades, and we have contributed to the work on Uyghur genocide, and I am delighted that I am being evaluated by the contribution of based on our competence. I am the political godmother of Sikhanouskaya and Veronica Sirkao, and these 3 women that you have heard about today were the symbol in Belarus to get free of dictatorship, and how they are being dealt with, prisons, prosecutions, and so on. And Svetlana Sikhanouskaya's presence in Lithuania is evidence of that. And her children were being used against her as means to threaten her. And today we are actually dealing with Olga Velichka, a very courageous woman who is located in Lithuania at the moment, and she manages the hospice from here remotely. We were helping her to prevent the hospice from being closed. But I see that she experienced horror whether when choosing whether to stay in Belarus and fight locally, because she was jailed also, or try and protect her children. And very often children become political hostages directly. Our Equal Opportunities Ombudsman's Office has publicized the data that the children's supervision still remains to the large extent women's duty. And now we see that the woman, well, we have seen this caricature, the running arena, and women and men competing, and men can run straightforwardly, while women, in order to run the mile, need to overcome so many obstacles, like taking care of their children or household chores and so on. And I am delighted that at the international arena we have a very clear understanding that we need to fight for women to be heard and seen, and without active efforts we will not achieve that. And social democrats rated during the election had the rating of women. Well, the Social Democrats wanted to have 40 and 60% of women in the election campaign. And when speaking about the election, about the international representation, I am a member of the committee regarding the reproductive rights, and in this committee frequently we speak about many post-Soviet bloc countries, and in these countries we still experience those stupid questions why we want to occupy positions. But there's at least a clear understanding that we should be moving forward. And the most important issue for me is that we have overcome the threshold, and we no longer need to be ashamed of being a woman and willing to overcome certain challenges. Moreover, when speaking about politics, the basis for my presentation is my personal story. I became a deputy vice chair of Social Democratic Party, and this was the first time that the Social Democrats have elected a woman as a chair. And we need to strengthen the left forces in Lithuania, and it is the first time that a woman became the leader of the left party. And I think that this is the signal that we are moving forward towards the right direction. And I'm still, of course, paying the price for being a woman. And I am the chairman of Kęstutis Pūkas impeachment commission, and I actually was being harassed by Pūkas radio station for that. And during the pandemic, I raised questions: how can we reduce the attacks against women? Now, I think we should move forward.
Labai ačiū, miela Dovilė, ir mes jūs.
Thank you, dear Dovile. We're going to continue discussing the issues that you raised during our discussions. I'm now very pleased to present our guests from Ukraine, Madam Katerina Leshchenko. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dalia. First of all, let me express my gratitude for inviting me to participate in such an important event. We firmly believe that gender equality is a prerequisite for success of the European integration of Ukraine. And in my presentation, I would like to give a short overview of the governmental policy of promoting women in the peace and security agenda. But I cannot ignore some theses of the speech of our keynote speaker from Belarus. Situation with human and women rights in Belarus is critical. And Ukrainian people have been expressing solidarity with Belarus people from the beginning of their struggle for transparent and democratic governance. From our side, we want to see correct understanding and reflecting situation in Ukraine. Tatiana, neither Ukraine nor Georgia or Moldova do not have dispute territory. We have territories occupied by Russian Federation. It is a fact. As it is reflected, for example, in the UN resolution on Crimea from 2014 and EU documents. As for me, correct naming is important part of solidarity for progress and democracy. And to continue this my presentation, I'd like to say that in 2016, during the hot phase of the ongoing aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine and the occupation of the territory of Crimea and parts of Donetsk and Lugansk region by the Russian Federation, Ukraine adopted the first national action plan on the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 until 2020. Since then, Ukraine has taken steps to improve women's participation in peace processes in the security and defense sector and the protection of women's rights related to the conflict. As a result of implementation of the first National Action Plan 2025, equal opportunities have been provided for women who serve in armed forces of Ukraine, which is of paramount importance in the context of ongoing Russian aggression. Currently, more than 57,000 women serve in Ukrainian army. In 2019, for the first time in history, women received the right to enter the military reserves of Ukraine. I can provide more figures which illustrate the increasing role of women in the national police, state border service, or national guard, but due to lack of time, I skip this part of my presentation. In October 2020, the Ukrainian government adopted the second National Action Plan on Implementation Resolution 1325. It is a sign of strong political will to promote the further development of the women, peace and security agenda. This plan aims to create conditions for equal participation for women and men in decision-making and conflict resolution, peace building, reconstruction, security challenges, systematic response to gender-based and conflict-related violence, strengthening the institutional capacity of the executors of the plan, including non-governmental organizations. The national plan is an important document that forms the gender equality policy in all sectors of government. That is the reasons why since 2017, the Deputy Prime Minister on European and Euro-Atlantic integration has been coordinating the national gender machinery in Ukraine. As I have already mentioned, increasing women participation in decision-making processes at all levels is an important aim of the adopted governmental documents. You have formulated the topic of our session, is achievable enough? And this question for me has a very deep meaning. We know cases when women's inclusion in parliament was a cover up for patriarchal society, as it was in the USSR or as it exists now in autocratic countries. At the same time, to have seats at the table is an important and necessary condition in order for the voice of women to be heard. The 2020 local elections were the first ones when the 40% quota was introduced in Ukraine. And during these elections, we had an extraordinary number of women candidates. Quotas helped to bring in more women to the decision-making in the councils, which previously had the lowest percentage of women. The average of women representation is elected in elected local authorities is around 32%. For comparison, there is only 20% of female MPs in Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. But not all changes were progressive, and we still need to improve the legislation. Reason, it is much more expensive for women now to run for office. There is more money in the local budget due to the decentralization reforms, and therefore women are removed from power, and parties are not supporting women at local level. Nevertheless, we look at quotas as an effective tool which corresponds the provisions of Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women on Temporary Special Measures. And the implementation of the quotas principle not only in political sphere, but in economical as well, through supervisory boards of the state enterprises, first of all in the security and defense sector, included in current National Action Plan 1325. Dear participants, non-governmental organizations, without any doubt, play a very important role in the formation and implementing policy. And as Government Commissioner for Gender Equality Policy, I have the function to support and strengthen the cooperation with civil society organizations. First of all, through platform, we called it Equal Rights and Opportunities, which already united more than 50 women rights organizations. One of them, Ukrainian Women Fund, leading Ukrainian NGO, which implement the project Women's Voice and Leadership. The vision of this project is that for women's voice to be heard, we need a strong and sustained women feminist movement in the country, region, and worldwide. Such movements use three strategies: building the capacity of women rights organizations, supporting women organizations implement their vision, and strengthening women's network and coalition, building with human rights movement. The positive example of cooperation is the creation of the multi-agency working groups to develop strategic document on gender equality. This spring, we started the process of developing national gender equality strategy, a document that will ensure the effective integration of the gender aspects in all spheres of society. A working group from representatives of governmental, international, non-governmental organizations was created, and with support of UN Women, we already conducted 5 strategical sessions to draft this document. Next step, consultations with local and national non-governmental organizations. The similar approach we already used during drafting the second National Action Plan. And at the end of my presentation, I would like to stress that in the context of the ongoing military aggression of Russian Federation, Ukraine does not postpone the gender equality agenda, and women's voices are important for developing and implementing policy of equal rights and equal opportunities for men and women. Thank you very much.
Gerbiama Katerina, tikrai nuoširdus ačiū.
Dear Katerina, thank you very much. Thank you for your voice. That voice came directly from a conflict zone, and it was very important for us to hear this voice, to hear your personal experience, and to hear what you see while working in the area of gender equality. We now have about 15 minutes till our first coffee break, and I'm going back to the same question which was raised and was summarized by Ms. Yuknevichene. But I will continue what I started to tell you. Well, we heard from our speakers that there is no doubt as to the women's contribution to democracy, and there are plenty examples showing that contribution in various countries. We can mention Maidan in 2014. We can mention mass women's protests in Belarus. And Tatiana was saying that a civil war is going on in Belarus. So fight for democracy cannot be separated from women's participation, and it cannot be separated from democracy. But there's also the question whether women participating in protests raised demands to ensure human rights in Eastern democracies. So women's demand to ensure human rights here and now will determine what kind of society will be formed after protests. So we see gender equality as an inseparable principle of Western democracies. Well, in my opinion, to put it briefly, if we don't integrate women's equality, gender equality, and women's issues from the very beginning, For example, in Belarus, the time when women's rights will be ensured might never come. Well, we are limited in time, and I'm now trying to raise questions that were put forward by our remote participants. And they are saying that, well, we can say that we experienced a conflict in 1990s, but back then we did not raise the issue of women's equality. And we might think that 2 decades later, everything is all right in our country, but no, it is not the case. Well, why will women, when will women have equal rights in the armed forces? Why do we only have conscription for men and not women? And women's participation is only voluntary. And why don't we have more women leaders? Maybe a system of quotas could help us to resolve this issue, but I would like to say that our society is against any quotas in political life or elsewhere, because quotas are usually introduced for a limited period of time in order to overcome certain imbalances. But our society is allergic to quotas, including in the area of women's rights. I don't think that I've managed to persuade Rasa Yuknevichine, and I would like to hear your opinions. So should we postpone this issue? And will the time for those issues ever come? So we will start with Madam Rasa Yuknevichine. Thank you. I will try to be brief. Well, I will stick to my opinion that it would be a very big mistake for Belarusians to fragment their requirements. Well, you are raising this issue, and I see those discussions in Facebook groups. For example, people are saying, ask Svetlana Tikhanovskaya whether she is for Astravets or against Astravets. People are also saying, well, that no European flags are visible in Belarus. So what are these people fighting for, and what are they against? Let us remember the situation in Lithuania in 1990s. I was a member of the Sąjūdis movement, and I see some similarities with the situation in Belarus. And when it comes to Maidan, we also see a very strong Soviet heritage there. But societies need to change quickly, and they do change quickly. We have changed quickly, and the issues that we are raising today are very important. These people need to get free. They need to break away from the influence of the Kremlin. They need to break free into the free world and raise all those issues. So women who are now active in Belarus, they raise issues of women's participation in conflict resolution simply by participating in those protests. So, well, this quasi-equality that was proposed to us by the Soviet Union should be transformed into real equality. I don't think that we should suggest to Belarusians to raise the issue of quotas or to introduce military conscription for women. But I will comment on the situation in Lithuania in this area a bit later. When it comes to quota, I think that no matter whether you are on the right, on the left side of the political spectrum, except for certain extremist right-wing movements that are now springing up in Lithuania and who are trying to use family issues for anti-European ideas. So I'm not referring to those movements, but women's participation in politics is not a right-wing or a left-wing issue. It is a very well-known issue, and in our political family, our leader, Mr. Manfred Weber, has spoken about this. And we might have differing opinions. I'm not against quota, for example, in Afghanistan, and I know that women were elected into local authorities just because of quotas, but it was because of the situation in that country. But why aren't we talking about quotas? Because if you look at the last two elections, you can see that on our party list, the first candidates, there is among the first 10 candidates, the number of women and men is equal. And we had Minister of Finance, Minister of Health, who were women. And of course, I do agree with those who say that we need to see women. Not all political leaders see women and invite them. And I can tell you from my personal experience that if not for Andrius Kubilius, who was a candidate to the prime minister, and if not for Andrius Kubilius, who encouraged me to apply to become the Minister of Defense, I would have not done that. So it is true that we have less self-confidence. We tend to underappreciate ourselves, and men are different. They are probably more proactive. And when it comes to the armed forces, I believe that we will become more mature and we will change. And it will be the same as in Sweden and Norway. I'm now replying to the question from a remote speaker. But these decisions cannot be top-down. If there are women who want the law to be changed and who want to be part of the military conscription together with men, that's one thing. But I'm not sure that many women want to do that. Both in Sweden and Norway, the initiative came from women. Women wanted to serve in the military, and then the politicians made the relevant decision. And one last idea, speaking about Eastern Partnership countries and Western Europe. I believe that with the fall of the Berlin Wall, with that concrete physical wall, we are still witnessing walls collapsing within us. Some members of the society have no inner walls when it comes to women's rights or democracy, but there is a certain part of society which has this Berlin Wall still standing within them. And if we look at Georgia and Moldova, for example, Moldova has elected a female president, and nobody was questioning her, so it is a big step forward. I also see the same changes in the mentality in Ukraine and elsewhere, and that Berlin Wall will finally collapse. And well, we are becoming more mature as a society. Every society has traveled this path slowly or more quickly. And well, unfortunately, my generation will have to go away with that Berlin Wall still intact, but we will have a new generation which will not be protected from certain tragedies or conflicts that are a cause for concern now. Thank you very much. I believe that this diversity of opinions is very important. It is important to listen to women who are decision makers at the national, local, and international level. It is important to hear their opinion in order to formulate a common foreign policy, because we don't focus on women's equality in Lithuania only. If we want to contribute to common foreign policy, if we want to exert an influence in the Eastern Partnership countries, we must know what we want to focus on when we speak with women. So we now have a few minutes to each of the speakers. You can restate your opinion. You can focus on aspects of women's equality in different stages of conflict. Yes, I would like to second what Rasa Yuknevičienė said. When it comes to Belarus, the main issue now is free and democratic elections in Belarus. And I believe that those women who are very visible in the Belarusian context now are leading by example. They are demonstrating that Belarus is changing, that Belarus is able to mobilize the nation and implement changes, not only in certain groups and on certain levels, but in the entire country. If we look at other Eastern Partnership countries, we could also see some good examples. We see the president of Georgia, the president of Moldova. We see a lot of active women, and there are also many women in the Ukrainian parliament who are active and who are speaking about the changes needed in those countries to bring those countries closer to the EU and to establish women's rights in those young democracies. As regards other questions, I was very impressed by Dovilės speech. It was interesting to hear how Lithuanian politicians establish themselves. And I'm very happy to see that inner Berlin Wall is collapsing, is crumbling, that we have women politicians who are visible, who are leaders, and who are able to reflect on many issues. But of course, we're not perfect, and there are some small details that need to be put in order. And there are some controversial issues. So, Dalia, thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. It is very nice to be in the group of these powerful women and to witness the changes that took place over the last 20 or 30 years. Thank you. And now, Dovile, please. Well, I understand the need to have one communication message in the political and security context, that the main focus should be on free and democratic elections. But I also agree with Dalia, who said that we might find ourselves in a trap if we are unable to learn from the experience of the neighboring countries. We don't need to decades to make sure that women's issues are included as a main point on the political agenda. I believe that we should draw on the experience of Mrs. Yuknevičienė, and from the human rights point of view, I think that it is important to ensure the same communication message in all those processes, and that message should be conveyed both by men and women. We should avoid mistakes made in other post-Soviet countries where women come, they solve all the most difficult problems, and once those problems are solved, women are told to step aside and go back to the kitchen. So women should not become simply an intermediate step um, leading to free elections. No, we can see that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is not that intermediate step. She grew stronger and became a real leader. Well, we heard some disturbing signals, the things that are a cause for concern, and I think that we need those inconvenient voices who raise issues, and women should sit at the decision-making table, at the negotiating table at all times, both in the crisis and later on. And I would like to say to Mrs. Yuknevichene, I believe that we can break down that Berlin Wall faster, and we can suffer one or another bruise, but let us be brave. And I'm very grateful to Madam Yuknevichene. You are posting a lot on Facebook, and I know that your messages reach not only your Facebook bubble, but reach a wider audience. And I agree that women's issues is not a question for the right wing or left wing politics. It is a broader issue, and I would like to thank Madam Dalia, who is always at our side when we try to solve issues related to violence or mediation. I remember one occasion when you were not allowed to speak in 2018, but I believe that we reached a breakthrough at that point, and the parliament would allow you to speak now. And I would also like to thank the Women's Information Center for their continuous fight. Thank you, Davile. I believe that we'll continue our cooperation. And now I will give the floor to Madam Katerina. A couple of minutes to you, please.
Uh, Inviting me to participate in this important discussion, and women really play a very important role in the security and defense agenda, and our Ukrainian next speaker, Adriana Rechta, who is the head of Ukrainian veteran movements, and I think will present you more stories about such participations of women who are veterans of Russian-Ukrainian war. And we also shared information and cases of implementing a national action plan on a certain 25 UN Security Council resolution at national and local level. And I strongly believe that creating the regional initiative on implementing solution could be a very important tool which help us share our knowledge, our practice, and combine our efforts to achieve peace and sustainable development in the region, and to help us to have real information about situation in every country of our region. I know that the OC had such plans, and I consider that we as women and human rights activists, representatives of governmental, international and non-governmental organizations, really can support idea of creating such regional action plan on implementing main provisions of certain 25. Thank you very much.
Didelis dėkui gerbiama Katerina, ir iš tikrųjų.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Our time is up. Maybe we have not responded to our major question. However, this generates many ideas, and I thank all the speakers. Thank you for answering our invitation. And I believe that in the dialogue of opinions, we will cooperate constructively, and we will give you a direction. to our society. Thank you very much. I thank all listeners of our forum, panel number 1. Thank you, Dalia. I thank all women leaders, and I would like to applaud all of you. And of course, virtual events and remote events will not take away our willingness to have a cup of coffee. Now we will have a 10-minute break, and after the break, the journalist Ugnė Siparienė will moderate another panel where you will hear the presentations about wherever you are in the world. I hope you are here, and I would like to remind all the speakers, all the viewers who participate, who are observing us, that you will be able to ask questions. Now I would like to give the floor to Ugnė Siparienė, the moderator of the second panel discussion, and she has been active in journalism for 20 years, and she concentrates a lot on equal opportunities and women's rights. And together with Ugnė, we will start the storm. Well, Rugilė, you are not my role model today. You are my role model today. Thank you very much for this event, and I will be moderating this panel discussion, and I will speak about storms, war storms, and conflict zones. The topic is very painful. Think about it. 2 billion people in the 21st century, on the 1st of July, are trying to survive the zones of armed conflicts, and especially during the pandemic period. And in fact, if we think about war and war conflicts, in the First World War, it was soldiers who were most victims. They were armed and trained. Today, when we speak about armed conflicts, we are mostly speaking about the deaths of civilians. And these are those people who suffer from armed conflicts. And in most cases, the victims are women. They not only participate in battles with arms in their hands, but they also actively participate in restoring the cities or taking care of the refugees or those injured. And those who are seeking to maintain peace in the world. Today, very recently, when celebrating the 20th anniversary of the United Nations, Danai Gurira, the United Nations Goodwill Ambassador, has noticed that those women who have achieved something, they have left their contribution because they were protesting against their exclusion, and they were determined to achieve their objective. Despite the fact that we are mentioning, celebrating the anniversary of this resolution, which inspired today's forum, and women very often remain at the side of the effort to keep peace. And during the last 20 years, there were approximately 13% of women among negotiators, 66% of the intermediators, and only a few percent of those who were signing peace agreements. We talked about that in the previous sessions. At the moment, I am honored to be sitting among two uniformed speakers, and I also see the faces of remote speakers. I would like to congratulate all of you. Pleased to see you. And I would like now to invite the speakers to say a few words before we start the discussion about women in the eye of the storm, women in war and conflict zones. And in this session, we have included yet another war. The war, well, we actually can feel the war in Lithuania as well, because it has come very close to us when we speak about Belarus and Ukraine. But we also have the everyday war, which is violence, domestic violence, and we will speak about that today. Now, I would like to give the floor to the speaker, who says that human life and freedom are the most valuable things in this world. This was said by Alina Radu, the journalist who leads Zerul de Garda, the largest independent media group. And she dedicated her professional career for of 30 years of journalist for fighting corruption and promoting human rights. Alina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you. I am glad to be here and to discuss about peace and about the wars and about what we all together can do to have better human rights. In this session, I would like to get your attention on a war that is harming all of us in many countries, and I would speak about the war on corruption. And especially, I would speak about how women in poor countries are leading this war. They are the most courageous, and they do a lot of fight to bring a better life for their country. If you allow me just to make a presentation, these are just a few ideas I would like to share with you. I hope you see it. Yeah. So I am working as an investigative reporter, and I am also leading an investigative reporting team. And we were the first media led by women in my country, and it was the first media fighting corruption. And this was a very hard war. Our media has 17 years now. What does it mean to fight corruption? First of all, investigative reporters would have a lot of challenges, but more challenges you have if you are a woman and if you are leading a team that has women as well doing investigative reporting. And this is not a problem only for my country. I put here a picture of Daphne because I really would like to stress everybody to understand how hard it is to fight corruption, how less are reporters' rights protected, and how difficult it is to get justice for those who suffered after they fight corruption. We have to say that in my country, in Moldova, but everywhere in the world, corruption actually has a male face. And then in my country and in many countries, those who fight corruption have often a female face and a female character, and they gather together to fight. How is that to be an investigative reporter and to fight corruption? It means you have to confront males in politics, males in very big businesses, males oligarchs, males in judicial system, males in police, males in prosecutors' offices, and to try to tell them about the human rights and about the right to freedom of expression and the right to get information and the right to spread information to everybody. And this is not easy. What we are fighting for? Actually, we are not fighting only for our rights, for our journalistic rights, but we are fighting for women's rights in our country. Because in corrupt states, you'll find a lot of poverty, and the poverty also has a female face. You'll find elderly women having a very small pension. You'll have young women who do not have medical rights, young mothers who don't have possibilities to get a job and to survive. You'll have a lot of trafficking, you'll have a lot of violence against women, you'll have violence against children, and all of this should be covered by investigative reporters, and all these problems have to be described, and not only, actually we have to present solutions as well. And this is not a simple fight. We have many young reporters who were attacked. We have a lot of cases in the court. We are attacked in the court, and we have to go actually every week to a court and explain why did we publish this investigative story. There were cases of physical aggression against reporters. We have a lot of harassment on social media, and all these young reporters or elder reporters, female reporters are attacked just because they are women and just because they are doing their job. And this is really difficult in a corrupt state because there is nobody to protect you. When police is corrupt, when judicial system is corrupt, when a prosecutor system is corrupt, when the government is corrupt, you don't have where to complain. You don't have to whom to say. So the only protection is we should keep together and try to protect each other because the system is not protecting us. Just to understand how bad it can go, this is one of my last attacks on Twitter. I was just commenting on a human rights story published by Deutsche Welle, a German television, and you see just a few of the comments, but there were so many attacking me on a totally aggressive way, and nor Deutsche Welle nor Twitter could do anything to delete these comments or, to bring an intelligent voice into these comments. So these are the conditions where women are working in investigative reporting. They have to do a very hard job. They have to confront or to fight against more powerful institutions, and there is no protection for them in corrupt states. This is the moment I would like to bring into international attention, because sometimes it might be too late, like in case of Daphne or in other many cases. Women investigative reporters are attacked everywhere, and we pay too less attention to them. Thank you.
Ačiū, ačiū labai, Alina. Thank you, Alina, for yet another view, touch point on our discussion. And now I'd like to give the floor to Adriana Arekta, who is the leader of the Ukrainian women veteran movement. In 2013, the world was observing the Maidan protests in Kiev, and Adriana was there with the protesters. When Crimea was occupied by Russia, she became the volunteer, and she is the national Ukrainian hero who has been awarded the award for her courage, the third degree award. Adriana.
And I want to share with you with the video, a short video.
Почувши слово ветеран, мало хто уявляє собі молоду жінку. Але це українські реалії. Ми ветеранки.
Ми не знали, що таке війна до 14-го року, аж поки на Україну не напала Росія. Тоді ми пішли добровольцями на фронт.
Ми не вміли тримати зброю чи рятувати поранені, але навчилися. Ми стали снайперками, артилеристками, парамедиками, розвідницями.
Ми досі вчимось миритися з втратами, боротися з посттравматичним синдромом, повертатися в мирне життя.
Ми об'єдналися, щоб допомагати українським ветеранкам, щоб розказувати правду про російську агресію проти України, щоб продовжити діяти.
Якщо ти воювала, волонтерила і тобі не байдуже, приєднуйся. Разом ми зможемо значно більше, ніж поодинці.
Thank you very much. I hope the quality was good. So, I'm Andriana Rechta. I am a female veteran in the Russian Federation. And on May 8, 2014, I Maidan from the Revolution of Greek Dignity with petards, tourist bags in socks and athletic costumes. We go to the against Russian Federation, against Russian aggression, and we needed time to restore the army, to strengthen our forces from that period of time. And we closed this time with huge human loss. Ironically joke that this was a story how we spent the summer holidays in 2018 because of the pain and PTSD. But at the end, I wrote, I lost more than 100 friends after the 3 months of the struggle and defense of the country. I have several words, like an activist, like a veteran, like a combatant, because the Russia-led conflict in eastern Ukraine and the occupation of Crimea represents the most significant threat to the West security since the conflict in the Balkans of the 19th. For more than 8 years, Russia has built a conflict that has claimed more than 16,000 Ukrainian lives and displaced more than 1.4 million people. And then after my demobilization and after understanding that women combatants are a unique phenomenon of the world, in 2015 I became an activist, and we launched the advocacy campaign in Lithuania against the discrimination of women in the armed forces and to acknowledge the important role of women in the security sector. Why? Why? Because I was a soul trooper. I am national hero. By the documents on that period of time, I was a seamstress. And as Katarina Borisovna said, the law that was adopted in 2018 give us the opportunity to be in combat. And then in 2019, we advocate for giving them opportunity for young girls to study in military lyceum. Then we started our war on the world, like to show our visibility, and we visited the NATO headquarters, the Parliament of Canada and Wales, the 63rd session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women and discussion of the main challenges for global security. And that this diplomatic arena became another arena of the war. And on such large international platform, we talk not only about women at war, but also about the past, deeply concerned about the situation, not using Russian vocabulary, because Crimea is Ukraine. We have international conflict for war, but not civil conflict. And supporting Russian vocabulary is supporting totalitarianism and not democracy or gender equality. In 2019, we registered Ukrainian women veteran movements, and we, as an activist, were active on writing measures to second national action plan, and also in developing an action plan for the communication concept in the field of gender equality, which is very important for breaking post-Soviet stereotypes and conveying to society the benefits and principles of gender equality. The member of our Ukrainian veteran movements now are 4 women veterans won the local elections. 1 women veterans is in Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, and they are the members of a lot of public control council at the ministries. It is very important now another arena of the war, because we started the peace building processes. And we met for the first time this year with women from the occupied territories. And we heard about the extremely difficult life in the conditions of occupation. And believe me, there is no gender equality in the occupation. I believe that if women address security and peace on an equal footing, became players in peace building negotiations, the results will be because women are telling the truth and are not afraid to call things right, because they think about the consequences for their country. All the results have been made possible only through close cooperation with the government and leaders in the government who promote the women of peace, security, and gender equality agenda, and because of the also international organization and their support. And now I'm activist, I'm a veteran, I'm woman who are waiting for a man, for my husband, who is still on the battlefield. But I know that, but I know that if the war will not stop, I will join the armed forces again if the active part of combat operations will start. Thank you. I hope everything will, you understand everything.
Ačiū labai, Andriana, iš tikrųjų už tokį. Thank you, Andriana, for a very personal and sensitive presentation. In Lithuania, and the whole global community supports the Ukrainians. I would like to congratulate your football team with the victories. I am now honored to introduce to you the participant of the session, a very experienced person, the Reserve General Mayor Kristin Lund. And she is a retired Mayor General in the Norwegian Army, and she is the first female who became the leader of the United Nations mission in Cyprus. And now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important forum, and I'm very glad that I can contribute with some of my experience after 40 years in the Norwegian Defence Forces with multiple deployments. I will draw your attention to some of my experience during these deployments, first to Afghanistan and then to Cyprus, to elaborate a little of the challenges, achievements, and lessons learned. I deployed to Afghanistan as the first NATO contingent in 2003. I worked at NATO Civic Center, Civic is Civil Military Cooperation Coordination, and I worked at this Center of Excellence. And we were asked to join the International Security Assistance Force headquarters in Kabul. I was to be running the Civic Coordination Center to coordinate all teams from all the different countries that participated in the mission. As a woman officer, gender equality has always been important to me in all my jobs. We realized that there were no CIMIC annex to the operational order or plan that was, and that was inadequate and had no lines of activities towards women in Afghanistan. During our patrols, only male Afghan interpreters were engaged. We experienced that women out in the villages wanted to speak to us. We tried to ask for female interpreters, no reaction. We wrote to the headquarters, no reaction. So what did we do? Well, we formed a female network, Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, and Norway, where we had the Finnish sauna once a week. We engaged non-governmental organizations that had women leaders and invited them to the sauna and dinner. And after a little while, we were able to borrow female interpreters from an NGO that joined us out on our patrols. We got so much information that our intelligence branch wanted to join us on our patrols. We were also able to enter the women's park in Kabul to talk to Afghan women. What was their view and concerns on future dreams? Very important to get a glimpse of what 50% of the Afghan people were thinking about. Another action to be made was to teach our own NATO officers and non-NATO countries. And we had to ask Afghan women to come to our camp, explain what the Quran said about women and how they would be expected to be treated by international force. The force with mixed patrols were role models for Afghan women. We were also able to make sure that we had mixed patrol. Soldiers' view is important on Afghan women, Afghan female culture, and how they were treated and how they would be treated. Just make sure, for example, that the women were driving the cars was important. Some of the lessons learned from Afghanistan, that there has to be lines of activities towards women that came after the first contingent. You had to educate your own soldiers about gender mainstreaming. You had to invest more in half of the population. You had to think about the women as a resource and not a victim in conflict. And you had to make sure that females went to school. For example, that it was a prerequisite if you wanted to rebuild a school, the school had to be open for women or for girls, sorry. If I draw your attention to Cyprus, I went to Cyprus in 2014 as the first female force commander ever. And I was surprised over the power I got. And I wonder why my predecessors had not done more when it comes to gender mainstreaming in that mission. Having also a female head was great, and we had a perfect chemistry. And for the first time in my career, and at that time it was 36 years, I didn't need to explain to my boss why gender was important to the mission. I started to make a dialogue with all the troop contributing nations to send more female soldiers. Just by putting gender on the top of the agenda in every incoming visit, we were able to move from 4% military female soldiers to 8%. When it went to the United Nations police force, from 10% to 25% females. All the positions along the buffer zone were not equipped to serve both genders. It took me 2 years to fix that. Furthermore, all the gyms were properly arranged with no provocative pictures. That was when I arrived there. And I would just wonder, how can or no females will do exercise or PT in bikinis or without bikinis. So also that female soldiers had to be accommodated within the camp as a security issue, and that was changed. Also, all the competitions we had, it's normal when you are deployed, especially with the UN, there are a lot of military skills competitions. Of course, there had to be women in all the teams, and changing some of the competitions from only being physical, to pull the most of the weight, instead of having incidents where you had to use your head and to solve things that you would actually meet in your day-to-day patrol life. Also, I was addressing always when we had code of conduct, so when we were talking about issues, I was always there, and that is also so important. You as the leader has to be able to talk, and I took all my battalions or sector commanders, and we talked about what is emergency sex, what is the situation, and I as an officer and a chief, I had to check what was the situation in your home country. Was prostitution legal? If it was legal, then I had to go to that sector commander and say, is zero tolerance in UN, and you had to comply. So it's by a lot of engagement from you as a leader. There were no incidents during my 2 years there. Also, I engaged in civilian society. I think that is so important, because if you don't, you will not have a good a kind of holistic picture of what is happening in the mission you are. So I did that. I had public speaking every week, and I went and I joined network. I created a military network there too, and that was important. I was also able to engage the first ladies, not to support their husbands, but to support the peace process. And I think by doing all this, you are, or you become a better leader, because you are able to see things from so many sides. Just as Adriana said, that women has a tendency to have a much wider holistic approach to different problems. The lesson learned, to be brief, you have to engage the troop contributing nations. It is possible to change all missions. It's important to engage in civilian society. That helps with better communication. And you get a wider understanding of the conflict. And also, being the first, or being a female leader, you also have to think about, you will always be a role model. And I think that is important also to empower other women. I see the time is up, so I will end there, and thank you very much for your attention.
Ačiū labai, Kristin, už jūsų tarnystę.
Thank you very much, Kristin, for your service and for sharing your experience that you briefly shared with us. If you allow me, I have a brief question to Kristin. You are the first woman to become a head of a military mission. Is there a second woman to lead the mission?
Well, I got the second mission. I was also the first to be head of mission in Jerusalem, where I was working in 5 countries, in Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Israel. But now there is a second that was actually coming during my time there at Cyprus. Now the third woman is Cyprus again, also a Norwegian. It was an Australian before that. So they are coming, and we also got now a deputy force commander that was at the Golan. She's now in New York as the deputy military advisor to the Secretary General. So it's starting, and UN has been at the forefront. They have parity within the Secretariat. So the military part is what is lacking and hanging behind.
Ačiū labai, puiku, tiesiog puiku. Ir
Thank you very much. That is great news. And now I will introduce our speakers from Lithuania. We will start with Captain Rūta Montvile. She's the spokesperson for the Lithuanian Chief of Defense. She has been with the armed forces for many years. She served in military missions in Afghanistan. She also worked with the Ukrainian forces, and she also participated in the UN mission in Mali. I hope I introduced you correctly. Good afternoon. It is an honor for me to be here. It is an honor for me to speak after General Christine. So I have a lot of respect for her, and she has a lot of experience. I think that my speech will follow her story because we have a lot of points in common. But I was more involved on the ground. This is what we in the military forces say. So I was not in the management, but I was a soldier who followed orders. I will speak about 4 keys, 4 key experiences that I saw in military operations. And I believe that being involved on the ground teaches you more than any book. So I will tell you about my experience with women's equality and women's integration throughout the years. I will speak about different approaches towards women, and especially women soldiers in military operations. So at the beginning, during the first mission, everything was simple. I was green and only had, I was a novice. I had only basic experience, so a lot depended on the management and the way the management saw us. My first experience was related to being a spokesperson. I was responsible for contacts with the media. So my mission in Afghanistan involved work on the ground, but I also had to work with the media. So when I went on that mission, I realized that my work will change because at that time, a lot depended on how the others saw me in that mission. And without planning anything, I came across local Afghan women. We had so our forces saw the possibility to have a woman on their team, and the majority of women in that mission were medical staff. I was a bit different, and the management decided to use me. So I decided to work with local Afghan women employed by the police forces, because our mission provided training to Afghan police forces, and our mission realized that they were not able to reach all people in the police forces. So they invited me, and they trained me, informed me what the police work involved, and I would then go on and work with women policemen in Afghanistan. So that was my first encounter, and I realized that I could perform important work. And of course, our soldiers would meet Afghan women on their missions, but they were not allowed to speak to them. So they invited me to go along with them. And beside my direct duties, I had to establish contact with Afghan women. So there was one instance when I went on my first mission together with medical staff. So I was part of the medical patrol. All medics were men except one dental doctor who was a woman. And well, I'm still in contact with her. And well, when you have to extract a tooth, you need to have two people. So I had to help her, and she taught me how to extract a tooth without any sedatives. So if you need such a service, you can always contact me. So that was my first experience. I received a lot of information, but when I went back, I said, and we started discussing that more women should be involved. It was in 2007. It was only the start of those missions and the start of our tasks. Later on, more women would go on those missions, and they would carry out the functions that were necessary. So the second time when I faced women in military zones was related to civil and military cooperation. So during the first mission of this kind, I was the person who carried out orders and tasks. During my second mission, I was involved in planning. So I prepared various projects. We built a medical school. We also built a sports center for women. So our focus was to achieve good quantitative results. We tried to do as much as possible. And at that time, I saw the consequences of war on women and girls, on schools and other things. I saw the very painful consequences of war. And I could hardly imagine what efforts were needed to try and get out of those problems. So that was the second time when I was directly involved in the work with women. During the third mission, I was working with special forces. That mission was different. We tried to involve women in villages, and local people realized that they needed to get women involved, that they needed to train women. And at that time, I realized very clearly that involvement of women and training of women to perform military tasks is very important. When you work with local women, you receive information, but on the other hand, you are able to fully implement your task. Because, for example, if you go to a certain locality and you need to meet with the local community, if you reach only men, this means that you reach only 50% of the population, and that means that your task is only 50% complete. And the most important thing for military personnel is to complete the tasks. Our chiefs understand that, and they try to involve women in their teams. And the last mission that I was on was in Mali. It lasted 1 year, but that year was really impressive. It was impressive because I traveled there with my experience. I knew how things could go, and I could contribute to that mission more. After the first mission, I already felt as an expert. I thought that I knew a lot and I could go anywhere. After the second mission, I realized that there were many things I didn't know. And the more you go on missions, the more you realize how many areas there are and how difficult it is to carry out the tasks. A United Nations mission is different. It differs from the missions in Afghanistan and elsewhere. And I hoped to be able to share my experience and to contribute my knowledge. So this was my focus. I was a representative for civil and military cooperation, but I tried to look at a wider picture. And as the general said, a lot depends on your commander. I would have been very happy if the mission in Mali would have been headed by a female commander. I think that the achievements would have been more impressive. But I did try to find some companions and to carry out my mission as well as possible. There are a lot of stories about the effects of war on women, but without going into too much detail and to save time, I will say that the main objective, my main objective during that mission was not to be alone and not to try and cover the entire region. I had to find ways how to share tasks. A UN mission is a very large mission. In Afghanistan, there were 200 of us, and we focused on a particular region. But the UN mission in Mali covered a very large area and many locations, and there were many staff. And I knew what our objective was. In 2018, the aim of the mission was to have 50% of military personnel in that mission. So countries deployed a lot of military personnel without having a clear understanding of the tasks. So I visited different locations and I would find female military staff working in kitchens or keeping watch in watchtowers. So they did not, they were not able to make their full contribution. So I initiated a project which was called a Female Outreach Project. We did not want to go back to Afghanistan and choose the same name, that is Female Engagement Project. We decided to implement a female outreach project, and the aim was to get women involved in actions implemented by military staff. And projects like that are always a challenge, because whenever we say that we want to organize training for women, there's always a risk of what men will think, because we speak about equality, but here we have a project aimed specifically at women. So we needed to find this fine balance and to train female military staff who were previously involved in kitchens or simply dealt with logistical aspects. We needed to persuade commanders that women should not be involved only to improve numbers or statistics, that women need to carry out specific tasks. And in fact, we didn't even need to train women. We had many African women who were well aware of the culture, understood the culture well, and faced military conflicts in their lives. So they needed only small additional training, and they also needed to find ways to cooperate with men. And I saw that they were very good at carrying out their tasks. So summing up, I would like to say that, well, you mentioned that I worked with the Ukrainian military staff as well, and I would like to say that this was a very useful experience for me. And all the experiences are useful, but Ukraine is very close to us, so it was a learning experience to me, and it made me grow. I can't say that I did a lot there. It helped me grow. And I believe that women can contribute to solving any issues, not only military. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ruta. Thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing your experience. I will now ask Mindaugas Akelaitis from the Lithuanian police to share his experience in fighting the war at home, that is, fighting domestic violence. Well, you know that when it comes to domestic violence, 80% of victims are women. So thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the floor. Well, I was surprised when I received this invitation because I knew that there would be a lot of women speakers, but I'm very happy to be here, to be the only man here. I'm feeling really comfortable. So I will tell you about police work. Although we are a civil service, we are not a military service, but we are uniformed personnel, and we are constantly in the situation of conflict. Well, there is peace around us. There are no military actions, but we face conflicts on a daily basis. And our police officers try to address conflicts on a daily basis. I have been serving in the police for 20 years, and I can see that you are commemorating the 20th anniversary of the UN resolution. I will give you a brief overview of the last 20 years or even 30 years. I will tell you about how women were integrated into the police forces and how we reached the current situation. So today, female officers account for more than 50% in certain police departments, and overall, the number of police officers is almost 50% everywhere in the police. Looking back, well, there were times when women had to prove their worth, had to prove that they were capable police officers. But they were usually employed in areas where there were no conflicts. They would not be assigned to street patrols, but later on the situation changed, and we can see more and more female police officers on the streets. And starting from 2010, 2012, we started having female patrol teams only. Previously, our attitude was that there was a need for a male police officer in patrol teams, at least one male officer, but later on our attitude changed. And I had a lot of female officers who were willing to work on the streets and were capable of doing that. And in situations where men can resolve conflicts with force or with their weight, women usually use their reason and the power of persuasion. And I think that we are now reaching the point where nobody would be surprised to see a team of 2 female officers patrolling the streets. Previously, we wouldn't send women on night patrols, but now there were instances where 2 female officers were able to face violent men who were bigger than them and who were waving knives. Well, I didn't have any doubts as to female officers' ability to do that, but now more and more colleagues are